What if that nagging feeling in the back of your neck was real? What if those hands reaching out from the dark that you believed were there were there? What if the monster in the basement really existed? And what if there was really something under the bed? Would you have the courage to face your fears?
Tonight's story is called Fear of Zombies, written by On Account of Bad Dreams, from r/nosleep. Just before I went to bed, I received an email from what looks like a throwaway address, with the following message attached. The person sent this to my private email rather than the alternate accounts I've been using lately, so I don't know how they found it. I'm hoping you guys might be able to give me some advice. Please. The email goes as follows. Hi there. I have a question for you. Are you afraid of zombies? I know you see them all the time. How could you not? They're all over television nowadays. I kind of think they're rather oversaturated, personally. To me, I'm starting to see more zombie movies and shows that are comedy, drama, and even soap opera, rather than actual horror. I get the appeal, but it's just not for me. But right now, we're talking about you. Are you scared of zombies? See, my friend Dave, he's always been terrified of the things. Absolutely petrified. He's never wanted anything to do with them and would freeze up whenever he saw an advertisement for The Walking Dead on television, or yet another zombie plush doll for sale in his favorite collectibles store. I've asked him again and again why he thought that was, but he couldn't really say. He's an artist. He likes to draw all the time, but putting things into words is much more difficult for him, especially for something that, in this case, constitutes as a legitimate phobia. For some background, my friend is incredibly empathetic. When he watches a movie, he finds himself relating to almost all the characters, even the villains, on some level, sympathizing with them and imagining what it would be like in their situation. I don't know how people get into the Hollywood test audiences, but I imagine he'd be pretty much perfect for that job. He eats up what he sees on the screen, and half the time it leaves me honestly impressed by how much he understands people. He can never really explain why. That talent especially helps when one of our friends is feeling down. Bad breakups are no problem for him, or a friend's shitty day at work. He's always been there for the people in our friendship group. A girl called Jane in particular, who was one of his closest friends. Thankfully for me, I've generally found I can turn off most of my negative emotions, so Dave's never really had to have these talks with me. The downside to all this is that he gets very anxious about situations. When a problem comes his way, he spends so much time trying to imagine how everyone's feeling that he often doesn't look after himself. I've seen him break down a few times, and when he does, he becomes a complete wreck for days. Recovery is difficult, and the nervous tics he gets aren't exactly ideal for the drawings he makes. One day, when Dave was feeling particularly down about something stupid, he called me, sick to death of being scared of a fake fucking monster, that he often felt he couldn't go outside. He wanted to get rid of this fear. He wanted to face this issue, combat it, and stop feeling like he did, so he would move on with his life. I could see why. I know a lot of people who felt sorry for him because of how caught up he was in this phobia, this irrational fear. So when he found out that Jane had constantly been calling into work sick, his concerns only began to heighten. Being sick in and of itself isn't unusual. Dave and I have had to cancel things on account of illnesses on many occasions. What started to make him worry was the consistency, the frequency. For the last week, Jane had been showing up to work, college, or any other gatherings of the sort, and to Dave's knowledge, remained entirely in bed throughout this period. When he visited her, she couldn't even speak to him. She was way too doped up on medication to even concentrate for longer than a few seconds, let alone hold a conversation. Dave wanted to know what was going on with her, but her parents were never home. We always got in by using the key underneath her recycling bin, which he told us was there in the case of an emergency. After about 2 weeks of the sickness, though, the key went missing. Dave could never figure out where it went, and assumed the parents took it after figuring out we were constantly sneaking in to check on her. It absolutely destroyed Dave inside to be so disconnected from his best friend, wanting so badly to help but being unable to do anything. By the end of the third week, Dave was a mess. He would barely talk to me at all, constantly waiting and waiting for a message from Jane, praying for it to say, "Everything's okay, it's fine, I'm all better now." By Friday night, I finally thought it was time to do something about the situation, and I knocked on the door that led to Dave's place. I showed him the key to Jane's house, and I didn't even have a moment to explain to him how I found it before he was dressed, out the door and ready to drive right over to check on her. I just went along with it at this point, driving him to the house and hoping he wouldn't leap out of the door while he was driving, in a fit of anxiety. The nervous twitch was back. I could see it. There was nothing I could do about it, though, and I just told myself that the best thing I could do was simply what I was doing right now. By the time we got to the place, the sky was pitch black, but Dave disregarded the time and went right over to the front door, unlocking it within seconds and banging inside without caution. It was dark inside the house, and quiet, which, to be fair, I assume is expected for a house at night when a family is supposed to be asleep. I told him as much when I saw him trying to control his breathing and helped him look for the light switch. Just before I turned it on, it only now dawned on my friend to actually check the time we had arrived at, and he took out his phone and read out what it was. Midnight. Of course it had to be midnight. Dave was still looking at his phone when I turned on the lights and didn't notice the bodies of Jane's parents until he looked up, about 5 seconds later. It would be no exaggeration to say the sight was gruesome. Dave had known Jane for years, and he had gained a close relationship with her parents over that time. So when Dave looked up over to the other side of the room and found the two of Jane's fathers lying on the ground, their faces a pale white, flesh ripped off of their throats in chunks, and their insides dragged all over the floor in such an extreme way that I couldn't tell which body part belonged to which person. It wasn't a surprise how he responded. While I wasn't sure how he'd react, Dave's reaction was far more animated, his insides finding a different way of traveling outside of his body. As he threw up by the nearby wall, Dave hadn't been eating much lately, so that quickly turned into a fit of dry heaving. Dave didn't dare look up until I heard a noise coming from the hallway to our right, the shuffling footsteps of a person. I have a theory about why some people are scared of zombies. I don't think it's what most people assume the reason for their fear is, either. It's certainly not the gore factor. While some zombies are decaying husks in television and film, others hardly even look like they're undead at all. It's not their ability to hide, to never stop moving, and to constantly grow in numbers until they overwhelm you and there's nothing you can do about it. And it's not their relentless hunger, the brutal snapping of their jaws as they get close enough to bite you, to rip apart the meat of your arm. No, I think the real reason why people are scared of zombies is because of who they were before. Think about it for a moment. Picture your best friend. Picture their smile, the light in their eyes as they talk to you, the joy you get whenever you speak to them, whenever you see their face. Imagine the urge to hug them, and imagine you look at your friend, that same urge to hug them as they trudge towards you, all light in their eyes gone and replaced with a ravenous nothingness. The chunks of flesh caught on their teeth being the last thing you ever see. I imagine that's what's going through Dave's mind right now, when he turned to see Jane standing in front of him. The raw meat from the throats of her parents threatened to fall right out of her mouth when she tilted, swaying as she moved closer and closer towards Dave, and towards me. I wish Dave was able to do something. I really do. I wish this was the moment he got over his fear. The moment he stood up for himself and realized he could face it. He could conquer it. He could beat his phobia and become better, stronger. But he just froze up. I'd never seen him so much like a statue before. It was as if his entire body, his movements, had entirely shut down. I bet he thought those were his last moments in his life. I don't think he was able to cope with that idea. So I acted myself. When I looked, there was a baseball bat placed just next to where I was standing, near the light switch. Awfully convenient, I know, but it was there, so I used it. In a rush of adrenaline and urgency, I pushed Dave out of the way. I ran up to Jane, lumbering towards me, who was slowly raising her hands as I took a swing with my bat, aiming right for her face. It took me about 7 hits until she stopped moving, and by the time it was over, I was drenched in blood and sweat. The liquids running down over my face and arms more than I had ever would have expected. Were there tears? In all honesty, I'd like to tell you, but I just couldn't remember. I could remember the look on Dave's face, though. In truth, that look will probably stay with me until I die. Ironically enough, that face, and how it made me feel, is the one part about this whole situation that I can't explain to myself, or understand. I spoke about Dave and his personality in the first few paragraphs with the usual implications that the present tense provides. I wish that there was true, but, unfortunately as it was for me to say, he was not so lucky to walk out of that house unscathed. By the time I managed to call the police, David passed out, and from what I can remember, the face he made toward me was the last one that I recall of his old personality. When the person in Dave's body woke up the next day to talk to the police, it wasn't him. Dave was gone. Whether or not he'll ever come back is not something I can say. The last I remember seeing his body, devoid of its old self entirely, it was sitting down on its bed. Not hungry, not tired, vacant. I sincerely hope that he's not gone for good, that the emptiness inside of him doesn't last forever. I say all this because I must hand it to Dave. He has always had an astonishing personality. I could never be as immersed in a situation as he always was. From how he viewed the world, he would always see the perspective of the people. That was what stuck out to him. How people are feeling. What is happening to them. How events affect them. Even to such a degree that he would even feel empathy for something such as a walking corpse. Because of his sympathy, this utter commitment to the people, it was a relief to me that he didn't notice the other things around him, the smaller details. Like where the key to Jane's house disappeared to, how I got the key, where his parents had been all that time, what kind of medication she had been taking, why the flesh from Jane's parents seemed to be removed about a day before we visited, but the bodies of the two looked to have been dead for about 3 weeks, why a baseball bat just happened to be ever so conveniently lying right next to the light switch in her house, or the curious smudges of fake blood and zombie makeup which got on my hands as I beat Jane to death. Jane really should have kept a better handle on her home security. I couldn't have told Dave any of this, of course. The vegetative state he was in barely allows for eating, let alone listening. Although, I suppose that was a bit of an advantage. I was the only witness to the event, so the only story the police were able to get was mine. It helps that I'm very good at cleaning up a large mess. Keeping your best friend's soulmate lucid, mute, and paralyzed for 3 weeks takes up a lot of energy. Covering her in makeup to help her look the part of a flesh-eating monster is nothing compared to making sure she never overdoses and dies. And I had a lot of practice with both. The whole experience was definitely educational, though, if I'm being completely frank. I'm actually rather disappointed I couldn't have helped Dave. I really wanted him to get over his phobia. Of all the people I thought might be able to understand what I was doing, I always figured it would be him. Oh well. Live and learn. Perhaps you can help me learn from this, though. See, a pleasant man knocked on my door the other day and gave me a few details about you. I know you've been doing some research into people like me, browsing through all these horror stories on the internet forums. You stay up all night sometimes, doing nothing but reading, deluding yourself and thinking no one is watching you, like all the other people who read stories such as this tends to do. It's rather cute. The man thought you'd be interested in my story, and frankly, I really needed to share this with someone. Until I wrote this, there wasn't a soul who knew what I had done. It was important for me to explain this, to describe what happened, and perhaps I can improve my technique for the next time I try to help someone with their fears. So tell me, are you afraid of zombies? If not, I'd love to hear what scares you. I'm sure I can help with that. I really like the idea of this story. The idea that he was trying to help his friend get over his phobia, and he just did it in the most messed up way possible. Oh, that was great. But this also shows why it is very important to face your fears. Otherwise, you become a soulless husk like Dave. So, I hope you enjoy the story. Come back next time for another scary story. And as always, remember to face your fears.